and welcome to the third installment of our ongoing series into the rise of that great authoritarian power known as the European Union. Last time we saw the outbreak of the Great War as a local dispute in Italy boiled over and led to the Axis powers of Germany, Franco-Spain, Russia and Japan going to war with the alliance between the British Empire and the United States of America, while at the same time fighting a bitter war in China. Where we left off, the British Isles had capitulated along with Italy. A landing in Beirut had cut off most of the British North African army, and Germany had just landed troops on the American continent, arriving in Canada. Indeed, as we pick up in February 1942, things look wonderful for the Axis powers, with the release of new weapons of war such as the Stale Baguette class heavy fighter, the arrival of Rommel's elite divisions to Labrador, the collapse of Greek resistance, and the encirclement of dozens of Allied divisions in northern Egypt. The war was going exactly to plan, and throughout these early months of 1942, events simply went from one advantage to another. At the end of February, the Communist Republic of Mexico decided to take advantage of America's weakened situation and declared war, invading from the south, taking much pressure off the advancing German forces. Germany also managed to finally break through their deadlock on the invasion of Sweden, and Sweden capitulated shortly after. Sweden's surrender was shortly followed by the surrender of the Allied North African armies, effectively ending the war in the Mediterranean. With her new industrial powerhouse, Germany was able to produce more munitions than ever thought possible and became an arsenal for the Axis, supplying France with much-needed anti-air support in preparation for their invasion of America. However, such good fortune was not to last, and by May, the United States had deployed numerous troops and were able to stall the German advance. In order to free troops to support their invasion, Germany pulled back its divisions in Africa, leaving these to the newly freed up Franco-Spanish divisions, which began the long push south, invading down the Nile and across West Africa. This would be a slow, bloody campaign that would last for the duration of the war. In order to secure vital tungsten to support breakthroughs in America, Franco-Spain invaded Portugal. The Portuguese, unable to defend their long border with Franco-Spain, were quickly forced back and ended up capitulating by the end of June. At the same time, Germany invaded and captured Norway. But the new troops and resources would not be enough, as the United States was not sitting idly by, and launched a surprise naval invasion of Labrador, cutting Rommel's entire army off from their only secure port. With Franco-Spanish troops still crossing the Atlantic, no reinforcements would arrive. No breakout would be completed. In the worst Axis defeat of the war, Rommel's army was forced to surrender. 22 infantry divisions and 7 medium tank divisions were captured or annihilated. 250,000 men lost in a single action. With the remaining beachhead far in the north of Canada struggling with supply, it seemed as if the German invasion had completely failed. This disaster, however, led to the most unexpected development of the war. Communist Mexico, upon realizing that without the Germans distracting the United States troops to the north, they would be overrun, made the unexpected offer to allow German troops into Mexico. The German High Command, bruised from their recent losses, happily accepted, dispatching 3 armies to Mexico. They would shortly be joined by the Franco-Spanish light tank divisions. While these troops were still en route, Operation Croissant was launched. This had been envisioned as a last-ditch attempt to break out Rommel's divisions, but even with their surrender, it went ahead regardless. The King's Guard, the elite of the Franco-Spanish war machine, landed on the American continent, along a beachhead stretching from Baltimore to Washington, New York City, and Philadelphia. The veteran troops, supported by their heavy tanks, used all of their training gained from the Mediterranean theatre and the multiple landings they conducted there to seize upon the United States' lack of defence. Within the opening engagement, Providence fell, giving the Franco-Spanish a firm foothold on the continent. By the 21st of August, Washington and Baltimore had fallen. To delay any American counterattack, the light tank divisions of the French advanced from Mexican-held Texas, heading towards the old French lands of Louisiana. By the 21st of September, Philadelphia had fallen, giving the Southern Kingsguard beachhead much-needed supplies. With the arrival of the 72 German divisions, the Southern Front rapidly pushed north from the Mexican-held territory, and within days, New Orleans had fallen once again to the Franco-Spanish. However, once again, the United States troops were not idle. Having seen how their surprise amphibious assault had defeated the initial German landings, they attempted a similar tactic with Mexico. Instead of facing the combined Axis and Communist troops head-on, they bypassed them, invading on the southern end of Mexico and pushing north. The clock was once again ticking. The Axis had to force American surrender before Mexico was overrun. Otherwise, the vital supply lines for all 4 Axis armies in the south would be cut off, and those divisions could end up like Rommel's. Thankfully, the war in the Pacific was going well in the hands of the Axis. Japan had captured British Malaya, all of Borneo, and had just made naval invasions of New Zealand, as well as northern Australia. Feeling she could spare the troops, she sent a small army to reinforce the French at the newly captured Boston. With the Japanese forces holding the northern front, the French were able to finally capture New York City, linking their northern and southern landings together to form a united front. But then, on the 9th of November 1942, the most bizarre event of the entire Second Great War took place. Hitler, inundated with paperwork, had taken to signing many documents without reading them. This resulted in him signing the infamous Order 420, a request by the Admiralty for more factories. With the German Führer not having read the document, he did not realize that this would hand over all factories in the coastal provinces to the Admiralty. With a stroke of a pen, over 100 factories formerly earmarked for the Luftwaffe were transferred to the Kriegsmarine. Overnight, Germany had become a major naval power, and upon hearing the news, the next day, Hermann Goering committed suicide. No more would the Luftwaffe be dominant in Axis naval planning. Instead, it was the Navy that would lead the way. Back on the front lines, 24 divisions of the French Mountain Army landed and began their push through the Rockies. Meanwhile, as American troops neared Mexico City, the so-called race to Chicago began. All French light tank divisions were ordered to take Chicago at any cost, with a generous bonus being offered to the 1st Division unseen. That division would be the 8th Light Mechanized, who would initially be repulsed by the city's garrison. However, after one day, the garrison fell back, and the 8th were able to march into the city unopposed. There they would Christmas in Chicago. However, all was not great for the 8th. They had vastly outpaced the other divisions and were soon cut off by an American counterattack. In early January, they would be forced to surrender. But much like their forebearers who were surrounded in Italy, their sacrifice would not be in vain. The panic that the fall of Chicago caused to Allied high command left them unable to hold their other fronts, and despite the USAF still holding air superiority over most of the American continent, the King's Guard were able to break through in several positions in the east, encircling many American divisions. The King's Guard would continue to push westward, and on Valentine's Day 1943, the southern and eastern fronts met, resulting in a massive encirclement of almost all of the United States' eastern seaboard armies. 10 days later, Chicago would fall, followed by Detroit in March. And despite a mutiny in the army caused by massive political divisions in France, on the 12th of March, the United States capitulated to the Axis powers. Once again, the war was swinging to the Axis' favour. The American divisions were free to swing north to push into Canada, supported by the Germans, who were finally able to supply their troops in the north and push south, quickly leading to the Canadian capitulation. Other than a few holdouts in Alaska, North America was secure. In China, yet another warlord made a power grab, this time Ma Bufang. But much like his predecessors, his promises of an easy victory were not to be, and the slog in China continued. The Franco-Spanish took a short while to regroup and repair their troops. Due to the excellent success of the light tank divisions, a new light tank was proposed, the AMX class. 3 times faster than the heavy tanks and more than twice as fast as their predecessors, these new AMX tanks would form the spearhead of the French army in the future. At the same time, it was realized that the war had taken a heavy toll on the French U-boat fleets, which now only numbered 9 vessels, so the new Damp Baguette class was put into production. Some called this design over-engineered and expensive, but the French decided that a submarine with as many torpedo tubes as physically possible would no doubt win any future engagement. At the same time, it was felt that the success of the heavy tanks in the European and American theatres highlighted that such vehicles would play a key part in any future war. France decided to double down on this and designed the Toasted Baguette Super Heavy Tank. Instead of 3 turrets, she would be armed with a single massive gun, capable of taking out bunkers or other heavy tanks alike. Costing 5 times more man-hours to produce than the light tank cousins, these new massive beasts would take years to meet the front line. But we will meet them again in future episodes. For the time being, the Axis powers would focus their efforts in the Pacific and Indian theatres. France's battle-hardened King's Guard and mountain armies landed in Calcutta and Dakar and advanced north to the mountains, cutting off the entire Indian frontline troops who had been pushing into Indochina. Shortly afterwards, New Zealand capitulated to the invading Japanese forces. Germany, on the other hand, turned her attention back to the European theatre, and on the 20th of November declared war on Finland, mirroring the events that occurred in Ukraine years previously. The Finns started the war by embarrassing the Russian Empire, simply strolling into St. Petersburg completely unopposed, with only 3 divisions. They would fight a bitter resistance war. However, by March the next year, they had surrendered, giving the Axis powers complete control over the Baltic. Back in India, by the 7th of December 1943, the King's Guard had taken Delhi. By the end of the month, the British Raj would capitulate. The thorn in the side of the Japanese and the crown in the British Empire overcome in mere months by the battle-hardened Franco-Spanish troops. Franco-Spain turned her attention then southwards, as the African War had become a slow stalemate, sucking in troops as they fought bitterly through the Congo. To try and bring an end to this theatre, South Africa was chosen as the next invasion. The Franco-Spanish fleets mopped up the last of the Royal Navy sheltering in the Indian Ocean, and on the 7th of January 1944, the Mountain Army landed, seizing Cape Town without resistance. They pushed north, and a month later South Africa capitulated. The King's Guard, meanwhile, were redeployed to New Zealand and launched an invasion of Australia, as while the Japanese still held on to the north, they were unable to push through the outback. France at this point found herself in a unique situation of having gone from not enough manpower to having over 5 million men ready to be called up. This was the result of all of their overseas holdings, along with a policy that made it easier for them to recruit their colonial subjects into the French legions. But then, as the entire bloody escapade had seemed to be drawing finally to a close, the unbelievable happened. Russia, which had been a puppet state of the Empire of Japan since the Civil War, declared her independence and broke away from the Axis. Germany immediately turned her attention eastward to her now suddenly exposed neighbour. With over 12 million dead worldwide, this war was far from over. But for that we shall return next time, as the Second Great War enters its penultimate stage, with the bloody battles across Asia. For now, I have been Dr. J. Ebus, and this has been a history of the rise of the European Union. Thank you, and good day.